Let's start by reminding ourselves what is the relationship between corporate governance and project governance. There's actually a lot of nonsense talked about the word governance. It actually is simpler to understand governance from the Greek word guberneum, which means to steer. So when you're governing, you're steering. So if you want, your project is a ship and you steer the ship are using various tools and mechanisms. The tools and mechanisms are governance mechanisms, but it's not governance itself. So this is a picture of two men trying to steer a ship. And if the ship was bigger, then you would steer it in a different way, but it's still governance. So the way you govern depends very much on the type of ship or boat that you're sailing. And then again, if you are sailing many boats, if there are many projects, the governance is different again. But all the time, you need to know the target. To govern properly, you need to know where you're going. So that's what governance has in common across all the different projects. You need to know where you're trying to go. The mechanisms you use are different according to the type of project that you're using. But the goal of governance, excuse me, the goal of governance is to reach the destination. So governance means to steer. With projects, what you're steering towards is strategic change. So you may remember this picture. It's a picture of business as usual. There is IT, there is business, and you just keep things running exactly the same way to keep things running smoothly. But if you're doing a project, the project, by the way, is hardly ever pure IT or pure business. They almost always need both elements to be effective. So you do a project. Why? Well, so you can change the IT. And why do you want to change the IT? So that you can change the business. And you start with the left-hand side, which is where it is now, and the right-hand side is where you want to be in the future. It's your strategic goal. And governance sits over that to make sure that you keep the business running, you do the project, and you implement so that in the future, you are well prepared to meet the challenges of the future. Here's another way of looking at it. Governance sits at the strategy level. So at the strategy level, you work out where you want to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. You define your outcomes, and then you initiate a number of projects. Governance is not a super project manager. Governance sits above all those projects to make sure all the projects deliver the outcomes that you want and delivers the benefits that you want. When we talk about governance, we need to talk about it from the top manager's perspective on things. The top manager will think of governance from a corporate governance perspective. And corporate governance is to ensure that management is focused on above average returns while taking account of risk. Now, I've bolded in here above average returns because that's a performance focus on things. Unfortunately, governance has become conformance oriented. And this is the way governance is perceived by many people at the moment. Too much conformance. And I've put PMBOK and Prince 2 as a ball tied around people's leg, holding them back, because they're focused so much on conforming to the time, conforming to the cost, when actually there should be a performance focus. And as an example, this is a graph showing the results of PMOs that are in the top 10% compared to PMOs, which are on the other 90%. And if you're a top performing PMO, your revenue in 2020 was 3 times better than in 2019. This is a performance focus. We're not looking at time, we're not looking at cost, we're focusing on something strategic like customer satisfaction. And if you have higher customer satisfaction, you also have higher revenue growth. So, again, this PMI and PricewaterhouseCoopers study found that those PMOs that were in the top 10% had 2 times better revenue growth than the other 90%. So if you're going to do governance, you need to govern for some strategic performance goal, such as customer satisfaction or revenue. It will depend on your organization, but these are a starting point. So without effective project governance, these are some of the symptoms that you see. There's a reluctance to say no to projects, lack of focus, strategic focus. Projects are sold in an emotional basis. There's no strong review process, overemphasizing financial ROI, no clear strategic criteria for selection. And what that means is that people do too many projects, and it's very difficult to kill them. And there's an underestimation of time, risks and costs. And because the projects are not aligned to strategy, the business needs are not met and the benefits are not being received. Yes, over budget, yes, over time. But in fact, the worst thing without good project governance is that your strategic goals are not being met. So that's our overview of project governance and corporate governance. What we'll do next is we'll move on to talk about benchmarks for project governance.